right, welcome to Through the Veil podcast. I'm Elle.
And Camille.
Today we have Thomas McConkie with us. I am terribly excited to help you guys get to know him a little bit better. I have the highest regard for the work that he's doing currently right now. He is a philosopher, teacher, he's an author. He's also a father to two young children. So, I mean, balancing all of that is monumentous. He just completed his study at Harvard Divinity School. He does retreats, he writes books. I mean, what doesn't he do? Tell us a little bit about what your specialty is, Thomas.
Well, I've never been introduced as a philosopher. I really appreciate that. In fact,
Tell us.
My Buddhist teacher's nickname for me is the little philosopher. He calls me Xiao Zhe. He's the only person who's ever called me a philosopher. I'm not a philosopher by training, but I like to think of myself as an aspiring
I
philosopher.
think you fit in that box entirely, so
I
I'm
appreciate
happy to
that.
give you
No,
that title.
I'm really honored. I mean, the way I think about myself, certainly as a developmentalist, I'm interested in the developmental process, especially with human beings, but not limited to human beings, how we grow and change over time into the fullness of our capacities. And I'm a contemplative by training. So I'm interested in the way that we intentionally pay attention and how that can support growth. And that could sound like very intuitive to some listening right now and vague to others, but I think in our conversation we'll make good on that claim that paying attention on purpose with real intention, it dramatically alters the course of our spiritual lives.
Right.
So I'd say, yeah, contemplative developmentalist and
Well,
aspiring
Philosopher.
philosopher. You can please call me the little philosopher, as my teacher should send
I
me.
so in,
love that.
so intuitive, Elle. Well, and I think that like if it changes our spiritual lives, it's going to change our physical lives because what starts from within, we start to express without, and it changes the course of our lives completely. The more awareness that we have.
Yeah,
Right. I
100%.
actually ran into your work because I have a really good friend who's kind of a mentor with me also in my own spiritual learning, and you offer classes online. You have your website, the Lower Lights Learning School. A couple of those classes are phenomenal. I've taken two of them. I've taken your Transformations of Faith course, which
Thank you.
is beautiful. I mean, it transforms your spirituality, right? If it's not changing you as a practice, are you really doing it well, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
then your Dharma meets, I think it's Dharma meets Christianity. Gospel meets
Gospel
Dharma.
meets Dharma is the title. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
My background also coming from Eastern philosophy, that one I was terribly interested in.
Oh,
So I'd
cool.
recommend those to
I
people.
appreciate
But
that. Yeah,
a lot of people, you also have like an insight timer profile where you put up meditations and things like that. I have a friend who
yeah, it's
religiously
true.
follows
Oh,
follows
cool.
your meditative practice.
Yeah.
So I kind of was introduced to you in the beginning more as like a meditation teacher, a teacher of
Mhm.
that
Yeah.
awareness. Some
People
people might
call
call
me
you
meditation teacher. Yeah,
right.
I'm often
Guru, we
called a
can
meditation teacher. That's
throw around that
okay.
words.
Guru, I shy away from that title a little more. It's not exactly my tradition or my approach,
Right.
but you know,
But you've described yourself and your personal mission differently, right? You just
sure.
kind of hit on it as somebody who brings in restructure as self-awareness. Can you expand on that a little bit more?
Yeah, I could offer a simple claim, maybe even principle, and maybe we build from there. But being a contemplative and a developmentalist my whole adult life, I'm very aware that the way we're taught to pay attention moment to moment in our lives, what we're taught to pay attention to, represents a very arbitrary, culturally and historically situated way of being a human. And what I mean by that is like what we're experiencing moment to moment is not all there is by any means. But through an educational, a socializing process, we're taught to pay attention to what matters, right? So we start to believe the older we get, the more we feel like, oh, what I'm experiencing, this is all there is, this is what matters. And I'm not even thinking about what I don't pay attention to because I stopped paying attention to that so long ago. How could that even matter?
Mhm.
Right. So
Right.
I'm giving voice to an unconscious dialogue that happens with all of us. And I remember when I was 18 years old and I did this like countercultural thing, this radical act of going into a Buddhist center and just sitting on a cushion on the floor and just doing nothing but like counting my breath up to 10, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, like doing that for a while. And like in that process, realizing like, wow, my internal landscape is vast and
Mhm.
unsearchable. Like I could just tell as an 18-year-old, like I had no idea that the inner world was this expansive. I had like, like people in my cohort, I'd been so enthralled by what's going on in the day to day that I hadn't really stopped and looked inward. And that became, at 18 years old, that became the beginning of this incredible voyage of discovery. And I'm still very much about that 25 years later.
Yeah.
It's
How
amazing.
how valuable though, because if people knew, like, I don't know, the deliciousness, like the juiciness of diving inward, there's so much more we can experience than just like maybe what we sense with our, other five senses.
Absolutely. It's interesting. I'm just going to free flow here, but I'm very versed in the Buddhist tradition, and also a Christian by birth, by heritage, by faith. I have deep Christian faith. And I'm struck as a contemplative that a word in the Buddhist world that they use for paying attention on purpose, for concentrating the mind and all of our sense faculties, they call it samadhi. And we translate that often as concentration, but really what it denotes is a bringing together of the mind from a fragmented, scattered state so that we can, I'm going to ad lib a little here, but we do that so that we can see something real. So see reality as it is. And when we look at the Christian tradition, which has a millennia of contemplative meditative practice, the word that tends to come up is recollection. And actually,
Mhm.
Somadi, from a totally different language and a totally different tradition, it actually is pointing to something very similar as recollection. When we recollect, we're gathering in the senses and our faculties from a fragmented state where we're just kind of skipping across the very surface of life into a place of seeing where we develop an intuition spiritually that, wow, like I am participating in a wholeness that we call spirit. Like spiritual reality is whole and holistic and full and becoming fuller all the time. And
Mhm.
that's what I really appreciate about your work is that, you're maybe contemplatives without knowing it, but as I see it, you're teaching people to pay attention in a new way to experience a greater fullness of what's already here. It's already
Exactly.
here.
Mhm.
I
Yeah.
love that.
It just makes me think about when I'm doing a session with somebody and they are talking about like their child who happens to be so spiritually gifted, they can sense the other side,
Mm.
and it's not like it's anything new. Their child is just, it's natural for them. It's recollecting that we, like you're saying, we don't pay attention to that as much as we get older. Our sensitivity perhaps to the other side is diminished because we're not focusing on it. But these children don't know
Right.
any differently, and so they're just, it's information that they're still like grabbing onto that maybe we forget about. So
Yeah,
interesting.
Right.
absolutely. Yeah, it's beautifully said.
Which may be why I don't know, 18 is pretty adult still to hit that groove, but I do feel like it's something that we're trained to lose, kind of like you just mentioned. The
Yeah.
world kind of filters that out for us and helps us reprioritizes for us the things that we should be focused on, the things that we should pay attention to, or the things that we should deem important. And oftentimes that gets lost in our industrial modern Western society.
Right.
That inward dive isn't important. It's not stressed. It's more than not stressed. It's often ignored and minimalized. And
Yeah.
so I love that you bring that up as the rich entry point into which all this greater understanding and wholeness expands. So
Yeah.
18, you began this journey. What happened from there? What led you down this path?
Well, I think it certainly had to do with my own suffering and sense of anguish. I didn't really know how to be with myself. I didn't know how to just be in my own skin and be comfortable with life. And something drove me to it. And I think my suffering was sufficient at 18 years old that even though sitting still and just like being with myself, like the psychological, mental, emotional pain, that was difficult to learn the practice of still sitting in the Buddhist tradition. But it felt, I think, less excruciating than just my moment to moment life did before I had found the practice. So it was an intense need, I think, that drove me to learn still sitting. But I remember really clearly, and I write about this in my recent book, that about 6 months into my practice, which is not that long in the scope of things, um, I remember I was just walking home from school. I was an undergrad at the time. I was a college student, and I was walking home from campus. And the feeling that I would get when I would sit still for about 30 minutes and just really pay attention to my breath and do my best to ignore, emotions and thoughts coming up, which I was not very good at ignoring, but I do my best. The feeling I would get, like after like a very restful, settling 30 minutes of breathing, all at once spontaneously came to me as I was walking home from school. So I'm coming down the hill on my way to my apartment, and all of a sudden, like there's just this palpable release, like a chunk in my body. Like I went from this like kind of wired state, frenetic, anxious state we're all familiar with, to just chunk. I just dropped down. My belly was soft. I was really relaxed. And as I looked out over the valley, I felt, my experience was that the whole world softened with me. Everything was just soft in and out. And I immediately knew, I knew this was a meditative moment. I'm like, I didn't realize that sacred grove I was kind of like pruning and cultivating in my own inner life, inner world. I didn't know that that was generalizable to life itself. So like that was a real turning point. 6 months into my practice, I realized, like, if this can happen to me now, like what would happen if I just continued to practice this way? And it's remarkable, whatever tradition we're working in. I'm most familiar with Christianity and Buddhism, but I think if we speak more broadly of the human tradition, like I've come to look at human beings as infinite, and paying attention on purpose, working with our attention intentionally, for me, that was very much the gateway to opening up into this infinity. And I've come to regard it as kind of a core, a foundational skill. If we're looking for enrichment in our spiritual lives, if we're looking for greater fulfillment and meaning in our general lives, I think starting with how we're paying attention moment to moment is maybe the most foundational place we can start.
I think it's important to note the principle behind this is that you can practice something like you weren't sitting on, like a mat meditating in that moment. You were walking. So the more you practice something, the more it becomes
Yeah,
more natural. And the
that's right.
benefits aren't just while you're practicing it. It's kind of like the benefits of exercise. If I go out and run this morning, it doesn't just help me while I'm running, it helps me the rest of the day. My metabolism's higher, I get those endorphins.
Your
So
mind's sharper, everything works better.
Everything's
That's
yeah.
right.
better.
So like the sometimes the benefits will catch you by surprise when you're just walking, because
Yeah.
you've learned how to like still your mind in a way where you're not working on it, but your body's doing it more automatically,
It's
Yeah.
internalized.
Mm-hmm.
And I love that language you used just now. Still your mind. The more we practice recollection, the more we practice bringing the mind together into a oneness, a unity, the more we experience the mind as naturally coming to stillness. The same way we wake and are aroused during the day and we rest, we sleep at night. The mind has its natural cycles of activity where it's very pleasurable and very helpful to think through things. And there are also plenty of times throughout the day where it's not useful to think. In fact, thinking is just racket inside of my skull, and I don't want to hear that commentator spin that story for the 50th time. So it was really an epiphany to me as my mind started to become still and quiet down, and I experienced just extended periods of stillness in life. I thought, man, this is such a powerful practice for all human beings who probably wrestle with that same inner
Right.
commentator voice that I do all the time. So it's really the benefits are really profound. And I think what I wanted to say, like even more than just the practical relief we get from getting a taste of stillness, in the context of a still mind and silence, I started to pick up, my radar dishes, my senses, like because they weren't just so glutted and overwhelmed with, uh, you know, meaningless chatter. I started to pick up on very subtle signals in my own body, impressions in my heart. Really, a still mind became the context for an enriched spiritual life because I was picking up on the spiritual realities that were always here. I just
Right.
couldn't hear them. I wasn't sensitive to them. And I think you too know that, better than most.
I love that analogy of like, would you just use like a satellite dish? Like it's all full of all that radio
Yeah.
frequency, right? To get a bit
Right.
personal for a minute, I just yesterday, early yesterday morning, I got in at like 2 a.m. I got back from a retreat in Sedona with a bunch of my more spiritually connected friends. And it was very interesting, even as someone who has a practice of this, who's very aware of these things. Um, I didn't realize how cluttered like, the dishes had gotten. I have,
Right.
life is just has this ability to overload us so easily. I have a bunch of little kids running around. It's summer break. Everybody's chaos, like all the anxiety, the pressure of keeping the house clean, keeping up on all my own work, the stuff for my husband, doing the stuff for my kids, being pregnant, like all of this stuff. It builds in a way that can completely distract us, cause anxiety, cause that mental, like it brings down your mental RAM, right?
Right.
So dropping that for 4 days and heading to some place where the whole focus was stillness. We stayed in
Yeah.
this amazing Airbnb that had it was like a earth castle in the canyons of Sedona. It was amazing. And allowing that stillness to come back into my life really reminded me in a very visceral way how when we drop that clutter, when we allow ourselves to collect, because my mental space had been spread thin, right, over all the little things that I was keeping track of and aware of, and allowing it, like you said, to like recollect, to bring together, to coalesce into
Yeah.
into priorities and importance and stillness and mindfulness and awareness completely realigns my focus and my experience coming back from that. It's
Right.
still chaos. I 4 days later I forget how loud children are all
Mhm.
the time.
Right.
But but I find myself more present. I find myself more collected, more focused, more capable, even just in my everyday experience with them, because I had that minute to recollect, refocus, and become re-aware of the priorities and the perspective shift away
Right.
from all of that spread out tension. I have this image of like taking your mind. What is that? Is it Gandalf the Grey who said like butter spread too thin on toast? Like
I don't
As Bilbo.
Bilbo, right,
That was
Bilbo.
Bilbo.
Wisdom in Tolkien there. I
Yeah.
once you can collect your butter, and mindfully and intentionally doing that, your whole life sort of falls into place in this really
Yeah.
beautiful notion that you feel connected, you feel capable, you feel present, you feel aware. Your entire experience, not just your inner experience, but your outer experience, it shifts as well too.
Mhm.
And
Right.
obviously that rolls over really beautifully into the work Camille and I specialize in.
I was just gonna say, Elle, I really wish that this was taught in schools because um, when Elle and I do sessions with people that maybe passed, and I'm not saying that this is a medicine for all things, and there wouldn't be mental health problems if we all just meditated more. I'm not saying that, but what would the world be like if somebody who had mental health challenges wasn't afraid to look within and identify this feels like
Yeah.
this is depression or this is anger, this is fear? Because and I know Elle and I both, we've just had experiences with people that didn't know what to do with these mental health challenges, or they didn't know what to do. Like, why did they turn to the addictive substance? It was a coping mechanism because there was a lot going in their inner world and they didn't know how to cope. So they turned to something else instead. Like, I just think it's the impact that it could have I know for me, like Elle just had a phenomenal experience. I know the impact on me when I'm more focused on my inner world and I recollect. It's phenomenal. Like globally, it's just thinking about that, it would be
Mm,
amazing. It would be astronomical because
mm,
we live in a society where people are afraid to even identify what a feeling is. Fine is not a feeling. So let's go deeper. Like, let's look at the feelings wheel. That's still kind of taboo in a lot of our culture to like even name a feeling. But then these
mm.
children are not able to know what their feelings are called and what to do with them. They can't place them. So there's just not a lot of resources, or people are afraid to get them. I just think it would change things so much.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, I agree.
Bringing it back with that, we do sit with a lot of people who are in the midst of these swirling emotions or grief or things. And I think there's a big fascination, particularly around what Camille and I do. Like how can you possibly do that? How can you have these gifts? How can you develop these gifts? And I think, like you just said earlier, Thomas, the most basic fundamental practice is shifting into being mindful of it. That's the beginning. Whether you do that through meditation, which is accessible to everyone and supremely useful in all facets of our lives, all aspects, or you do it through some other means, prayer, quiet contemplation, being in nature, focusing on those kinds of stillness. Like there are many modes in which you can access this, extending that awareness beyond just the physical day to day, beyond just what the external stimulus is the
Mm,
beginning of that. Intuition is the beginning of that awareness. And I say it all the time, especially with spiritual communication or awareness. um, Everyone has the capacity for it. We can all do it. We're spiritual beings in a physical format. And
mhm,
shifting that perspective and aligning that perspective with something more spiritual opens that doorway to whatever's on the other side. And it is a world on the other side.
yeah.
It's not just spirit, it's not just God, it's not just a deeper, richer personal experience of like your identity. It's all things. It's connectivity, right? And
Mm,
we can
mm.
all access that.
That's what I see from my particular perch, I've just been passionate about contemplation my whole life, but everything you're saying, like from your particular modality and your unique talents, it feels that way to me too. And I think that that might be indicative that we're actually experiencing one reality, kind of bringing our own sensibilities to it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That would be a good book title. My particular perch. It'd have like a little black bird, can you see it? Can you see it? That's your next book. I just named it for you right there.
Write that one down, scroll it away. Um, I love that you highlight that because a lot of people today, with the focus that we have on this like post-industrial, highly scientific, rational mindset, a lot of it is about like, well, where's your proof? Where's your validation? Where's the tangible evidence of the existence of these things, right? Scientific method it out for me. And I think it is a validation in and of itself that people can come from completely different angles and find this space where all of us
Mm,
sit as one thing, right? This
yeah.
interconnective, this unity, this love, this place of that richness. And
Mhm,
the fact that everyone can get to that point and have that experience, to me, I take that as valid evidence, as valid proof of something existing beyond, the physical point of awareness that we most of the time focus on.
mhm, mhm. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So we did kind of hope, Thomas, we know you've had some amazing experiences of your own within that meditative space. I attended a conference where I saw you speak last year, last October, and you brought up this experience that you had journeying across the United States. Your family was moving from, I think, Utah to Boston,
Yeah.
and you had a moment of stillness in a place that meant a lot historically and like genealogically to you, and
Yeah.
and I wanted you to maybe share that with us if you're comfortable.
Yeah, I'm happy to. I'm a McConkie, so I can tell long stories that border on the fantastic and questionably factual. So I'll invite you to fact check me here, keep me honest.
Good
But
entertainment value.
I'll follow the advice a friend of mine gave me and just tell it straight. Uh, I was road tripping across the country as me, my dog. I was going to meet my wife and our son, a few days from then. And I didn't know this, but like if you drive from Utah to the East Coast, you can make it a Mormon history tour. Maybe
Mhm.
any Latter-day Saints on the call, they'll be like, oh, I know that corridor. I didn't, but like as I started to look at all the spots I could stop at, I was pretty excited. And one of those was winter quarters. And when I mentioned that I was going to go to winter quarters and just stop there, because I'd never been, my mom said, "Oh, make sure." She said, "You have a great great grandmother named Anne Elizabeth Ryder Young, who was born in the back of a handcart there at winter quarters." And I thought that's amazing history. I'm so excited to know that. Like just knowing that and getting to like be in that encampment where my great great grandmother was born, that is so meaningful to me. And that, then I just kind of filed that away, didn't think about it again, and showed up in winter quarters, Nebraska. It was a really hot day. I was trying to keep my dog hydrated and stretch my legs because I had 4 days of driving. And I think, where am I, like day 1.5 at that point? At any rate, um, I was led into a kind of like if you've been there, there's a visitor center at winter quarters, and there's an observation room kind of with panoramic story windows that look out over the gravesite where many Latter-day Saints died of exposure to the elements. And I had no idea what was coming. I didn't go to winter quarters with an expectation that something should happen. I was just excited to know this is a historical site, and one of my relatives was born here and survived the encampment at that. And as I was looking out at the cemetery, all at once, it's like the curtain of the visible world just rolled back. And I was in the presence of all of the ancestors, like my ancestors, but all the ancestors, like all of the Mormon ancestors, but even behind them, like just deep ancestry all the way back. And the feeling was like energetically overwhelming in my body. It's like my body was too small to contain it. It was so big. And I think at some point I let go of trying. It just started to pour through me. And I was so struck as like all of this energy is pouring through me, and I feel I'm in the presence of this mighty company. I heard a voice, which I was also, by the way, not expecting to hear. I was just some guy at a visitor center, there to, doing my Mormon tourism. But I heard a very clear voice that totally caught me off guard because um, it was not something that I was capable of thinking myself, because the communication was confusing to me. It was surprising to me. But the moment I heard it, it struck me as like I was learning a spiritual reality that I was not fully sensitive to before that. And the voice was, let me pause here and like do my best to, remember it. If not word for word, then, faithful to the message. It was, we need you to feel this. You have a body and we don't have a body right now. But if you're willing to feel this, you can feel this for us, was the implication of it. And if I interpreted a little bit more what I knew intuitively in that moment, was that the fact that I have a physical body, that I'm an embodied being, is an immensely beautiful spiritual reality in its own right. But furthermore, just by having an open heart and paying attention to the spiritual reality that's present right now, I can actually help my ancestors process an experience that was too overwhelming for them in their bodies in the moment where there was death all around them. They'd just been driven from their homes and everything they loved horrifically by mobs and violence in Illinois, but many other places prior to that. There was so much they were carrying, and in that moment, I knew like it was too much for them, and they succumbed to it. And here I was in a body, resourced. Like my feet were on the ground, I was breathing, my heart was bursting, and I could just feel a little bit of that with them. I felt very much like my ancestors were asking me to partner with them in that moment and to do a service for them that I didn't even know was possible to do. And that changed me. I've never experienced my body the same way after that. I've never experienced my ancestors the same way after that. And I didn't see it coming. I didn't even know such an experience existed, per se. So I hope I got like the important details there.
That's incredible.
It's phenomenal.
I I had a couple of notes I wrote because I had to like just some things that really stood out to me. You said you had no expectation. You let go of
Yeah.
trying and you let it pour through you. I think that's
Yeah,
huge
that's
because in
true.
this work that we do, um, we don't want to get it's sacred, you know. Al, you talk about this a lot. It's just sacred. We don't want to get to the point where it's like, oh, it's casual or it doesn't mean as much. We have to have this gratitude and no expectation. Like I can't guarantee any result. I can't
Yeah.
guarantee any kind of spirit communication. We're grateful for what comes. We have to just let go. We can't be in charge. Like, I'm going to make this happen, or, I'm going to make sure that my son talks to me today and he like tells me all the things he's doing. And like, we're going to have a 5 minute conversation. I just let go. Whatever happens, happens. That was huge. And then the whole, like, you have the body and you feeling things for your ancestors. Like, that's a whole episode. That's so intriguing.
We've touched on that, but only touched on that before. I think we give we give spirit maybe too much credit. Like lowercase s, not the spirit, but spirits. Um, in thinking that they have everything figured out, that they
Yeah.
are at this super high elevated place and plane and have all the grand understanding. But what we experience now in the life that we're in is intimately connected with everything that came before in a way that's really hard to put to language, that is oftentimes something you just have to experience. Um, and when you do experience that kind of unity, the connection that we have, it's biological, it's spiritual, it's transformative. And we do so much healing forward and backward in the human experience while we're here,
Mm.
whether we're aware of it or not. But being open to that, I mean, some of the most transformational experiences I've had, I was not prepared for. I was like going through my day-to-day stuff, like just taking a small moment to be aware of it. And it is like that veil parting. It's just like an unfolding before you that blows you away because you're not prepared for it. But it is trusting. It's being able to be open to the trust of what could possibly happen at any moment. And that I think goes back to the practice. It's a practice of building that trust so that it's there, it's ready, it's within you
Mm.
for that experience to occur. That's
Yeah.
the openness that you're building through any kind of intentional practice.
Yeah. I appreciate what you're saying, and particularly this point about not, you said giving spirit too much, not giving the spirits too much credit. I can only speak intuitively from my own experience, my own understanding, and we'll all have a different kind of encounter with this realm,
Mhm.
this space we're talking about. But for me, what feels intuitive, and this I learned a lot about this at winter quarters, but like, yes, the ancestors, the abler souls who seem to be present in a realm that is here, but also subtle to the point that we can miss it if we're not paying attention in a particular way. Those noble and sometimes abler souls bear witness to us in a particular way of profound spiritual realities. And yet, surprisingly, at least for me, there seems to be a deep reciprocity between us, meaning that like not only are they ennobling us in an exchange with us, but they depend on us to live the lives that we're living, that we make something possible for them by living our lives in a particular way. We're embodying realities in a concrete way that they couldn't when they were embodied beings. So it's really touching to me to be to be an exchange in this way. It's surprising, right? Like you said, I think in some ways in Sunday school we're taught to think of like this kind of mortal realm as being a place of like we refer to as fallen all the time, and
Hmm.
like we're just like, you know, uh, eating our bread by the sweat of our brow and somehow trying to make it through this very difficult period of trial. But it's different when we think about like what I'm kind of talking my way into the intuition I'm having.
Verbally
when I
processing.
when
Yeah.
when I communed with the ancestors at winter quarters, it became very clear to me that this was the exalted state, that
Hmm.
like we're actually the exalted reality that they longed for. So what does that mean if we flip that whole script on its head? We're not just trying to like pass our probationary state to get somewhere beautiful. What if like we're the exalted beings that are liberating the beings who've given up the body form? That would make this a kind of heaven. That would make this a kind of a noble exalted state in its own right. And we don't tend to talk about the earth that way, at least not in my experience. So it makes trouble, I think good trouble, to a lot of our notions about what does it mean to be saved? What does it mean to progress spiritually and get somewhere better than here? What if getting somewhere better than here in a salvific sense means actually being more willing to be right here? Those are all implications I think the experience brings up for me.
I like that term, good trouble. I'm gonna internalize that into my colloquial usage. I love that. It's a very Buddhist notion of like attaining the Zen, attaining the highest plane of perspective while we're here now, not putting it off to the future,
Yeah,
not
that's
waiting
right.
for some further exalted moment, but exploring the beauty and the fullness that is current. And I think it's a beautiful cycle to highlight. I mean, pros and cons, right? The spirit world has maybe more freedom in certain capacity that we do here, but also we have more freedom in other capacities than they do here. And it's something, we came before, we're here now, we become something else after. And then, in the Christian tradition, we have this notion of at some point oneness, bringing all those things back together holistically in like a beautiful moment of triumph and perfection, right? Where
Yeah,
we can take these two halves of this being that we are and harmonize them into the perfection, the perfect state.
yeah,
But both of those things have beauty that we need to fully realize here and now where we are.
Yeah,
yeah,
appreciating what
yeah.
we actually do have versus, oh, it's so much better on the other side. It's, you read near death experiences and you're like, why would I want to be here? You know, I'm going to go fly and, like whisk across the grass that sings to me and like, all of these things. Like, why would I want to do earth life if I could just go live in the rainbow of colors? Um, but when you said fallen, Thomas, we live in this fallen world. Well, maybe it's fallen in that there's not as much awareness. We've fallen in awareness. And so we have to raise our own frequencies, to be able to match, to be able to tune into the spiritual frequency. Maybe it's just about like elevating ourselves through
Yeah.
the opportunities that have been provided for us.
Yeah.
It's also
Just,
just so
just to
fascinating.
be,
Yeah, go ahead.
sorry to interrupt. I mean, just to insist on my radical point, I'm not so sure that it's a fallen world,
Yeah.
is what I would say.
Then if the people in the spirit world, our ancestors, if they need us so much, like how can we better understand what
Serve
we need to
them.
do to serve them? Thank
Yeah,
you.
yeah,
It's a
yeah.
fascinating question.
It really is. I had no, exactly, and that's the question that really came alive in me at that particular, in that moment, in that experience.
Number one, we need to have the awareness that they exist, that they love us, that they care about us, they're invested in us, and that they actually, that fifth part is that they need us. But to explore that, that's like a whole other episode.
It's
It's just
it's like we
fascinating.
need them as well. It's all
Mhm.
cumulative, right? It comes together.
The hearts of the
And
fathers turning to the children and the children to the fathers.
right, which I think bleeds into Thomas's experience with like self-actualization that he had during this
Well, right.
musical
I mean,
moment.
the what we've come to call the reggae story. It's similar in kind to this whole theme that we're meditating on, if you will, together right now. So not that long ago, maybe a couple weeks, 2, 3 weeks ago, I'd been looking for an album that I listened to in high school, a reggae album. I had not heard it since high school. I mean, it had been a long time, 20 plus years. Um, and I finally found it. And it was just like a Sunday morning, and like the kids were situated. Sora was napping. I had a moment to like, get out the vinyl, so to speak. And I started listening to it, and it immediately, as music does, which I love it for, it started to bring up like this experience of like just being agonizingly depressed and anxious. And my teenage years were a really difficult time in my life. I'm not going to hedge by saying it's difficult for everybody. It was uh, one of the most painful times in my life, about age 13 to age 25 or so, just a lot of darkness and depression. And I was listening to this music, and it was like no longer a memory. It was like somatically my experience. I was immersed in this depression. And once again, like similar to winter quarters, I was embodying this like suffocating pain and depression, but I was resourced. I could just really feel the ground beneath me and these big breaths and my heart just radiating. And I felt me, like I'll bring it to present moment. It was me 3 weeks ago, like listening to reggae, but I felt me right now in this moment metabolizing an experience that was completely overwhelming to my 16-year-old self. And in that moment, I think intuitively, I'm learning in this conversation in real time that this experience I'm describing was possible because of winter quarters, because of what I learned there in part. But I was metabolizing all of this pain, and I realized like I am that child's ancestor. I am his higher self right here and now in this noble and exalted realm. And he is depending on me right now to actually feel this in my heart. Like to this like stoned 16-year-old who could like just barely get himself dressed in the morning, to have told him that, guess what, your higher self is actually holding your pain in his heart right now so you can get through this time. Like that's what I knew in my embodied reality in that moment when I was just connecting to that 16-year-old. And once again, it opened up the gates of possibility, like, wow, what I'm willing to embody right now, what pain I'm willing to experience, if I'm willing to descend beneath all things, as we read about Christ and his own remarkable journey, to the extent that I can descend beneath anything, I'm exalting it with my higher awareness and my loving heart. And I felt myself healing that teenager, except this is where it gets really screwy because that doesn't make any sense. Like that teenager is me and that's in the past. So that teenager is supposed to be causing me, but I was actually the future self flowing backwards in time. So the future was causing the past. That doesn't make any sense. We're not taught to think about
Well,
clock time as going backwards and
it
forwards.
does make sense if you read a lot of near-death experiences. Time
You're
is
right.
wonky, right?
Thank you.
And
Thank
or
you. So
study physics. I
I'm
mean,
in,
like time is
yeah,
just a chronological construct. So
I'm in good company then, but
Yeah.
like it was just so visceral, like to feel that the future was healing the past. And this
right.
happened to be a young man whose success I'm very invested in. It was really, it was really, I say that tongue in cheek, like I love the guy, is what I'm saying. Like I want him to get over that depression. And I had no idea that like my willingness to be embodied right now is actively healing him. So these are trippy experiences, only that they're not trippy. They become more and more ordinary as we
Right.
open our awareness to, wow, this is actually just what's here when
Yeah.
I'm willing to pay attention in a different way.
Yeah. What's
It
real
reminds
is
me,
very exciting.
exactly. It reminds me of we have in, let me try to put this to words. We have this concept, I think, in Christianity of like trusting the process, trusting God. Like these hard trials that we move through are for our betterment, our growth and all the things. And we kind of write that up to the explanation of what it is. But I feel like you kind of experienced the metaphysical process of that actually occurring, right? Because
Mm,
we move through these things where we are allowing space for ourselves to experience and then to heal. And then at some point in the future, that healing is going to be reciprocated backwards and forwards. And it's a beautiful circular motion, like within our own life. We have these moments where we will be carrying ourselves, we'll be healing ourselves. Maybe at the time, our experience isn't meant for us to be processed. It's meant for us to be lived. And then at some later point, we will have the elevation from that perch you're talking about to look
mm,
at it from a higher perspective in order to gain the healing that we need that's not available to us in the moment because we have to be in it. But then also I have had so many experiences both with spirit, with people, and then also in other modalities. My sister-in-law does hypnotherapy, and she's a certified hypnotherapist. And this is the kind of thing that they address constantly, talking to that inner 6-year-old, that inner teenager, that inner 21-year-old. And also in other, energetic healing modalities. I had a really amazing EPT session with a friend of mine a couple of months ago where I felt that visceral energetic release of things that I was carrying that I wasn't capable of healing yet, but I was also carrying, that trauma from from my mother, from my grandmother, from my great grandmother, and being embodied in this moment now. I had access to releasing those physically in my body that they
mhm,
no longer did. And I, maybe because of my own gifts and being that spiritually aware, I was able to see it move backward in time and space
mm,
through my own lineage, through my body, through my mother who is still living, through to my grandmother who has passed, through to her mother,
mm.
and release that burden that we had been carrying emotionally forward for 4 generations. And how amazing that we have the ability to do that here with them and kind of like symbiotically benefit from something.
Right.
It
Yeah.
really is an astounding concept.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I think we need to
remarkable.
get
Yeah.
comfortable with things maybe not being linear, like with the grief process. There's the 6 stages of grief. Okay, now that I'm over denial, I'll never feel denial ever again. That's not true. Now that I've processed this anger, I'm never going to feel anger again. That's not true. It's not linear. It's a
Right.
cycle. So Thomas was talking about going back to heal his 16-year-old self. Well, that was years ago. Sometimes we think that we have fully healed, but then we're still holding on to stuff, like Elle said, and there's more to do.
Yeah.
So we're going backwards in order to move forward. We're not marching forward always. We're going backwards, and in so doing, not only are we healing possibly ourselves, but also others maybe that haven't had the opportunity, that are not in bodies, to heal from
Right.
something like that. We're showing them how.
Yeah.
And can I throw out also possibly our children?
Yeah,
Because it doesn't just work backward in time, it works forward in time as well.
exactly. This concept is so interesting.
It goes really deep. I mean, and I think a dimension I want to bring into play here is that right now, if I still my mind, if I settle in and like just let my heart and my body really relax, it feels really clear to me that there is a kind of elevating love, a kind of buoyancy to this moment, an energy, a power that is drawing me up beyond myself into something nobler. And who are those beings who are experiencing this divine love, that are pouring this divine love down on me 500 years ago and 500 years in the future?
Hmm.
Again, this time, the construct of time falls apart, because what I experience as grace right now, this redeeming and elevating love, is coming from every time and every place and everyone. And somehow we're the recipients of it. Not only the recipients of it, but we're offering it to the beings who are our stewardship. So it's more than I could articulate, but it's really stunning to me, like
Yeah.
how awesome this love is. Yeah.
And it's such a
Yeah.
journey. I remember when I was 14, I said a prayer. I remember I'd gone through something really hard, and then a friend went through something similar right after, and I was able to help her. And so I said a prayer, which Sometimes I'll call it like my curse prayer, where I said, Heavenly Father, I'll go through anything, anything you want me to go through, if I can help somebody, because it was so impactful for both of us. Like, it was really cool. It was healing for me and it was helpful for her. And so maybe instead of I'll go through anything to help other people, maybe I can also add, maybe I need to help myself. How can I help myself before I can help other people? Like, what do I need to heal from my past?
Yeah.
Like, that's why opening up and becoming more mindful, the spirit will teach me. God can teach me. My ancestors can teach me what needs fixing, what's broken, because there's always work to do. I mean, I know I've got a lot of work to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
It feels kind of like we're partaking in just a very small piece in the omniscience of God. Like, this is that experience.
Yeah.
This is what he is, all present throughout time, forward, backward, upside down, right? He is that love, that pulling from up, no matter where we are,
Yeah.
when we are, how we are.
Yeah. 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 And the thinking mind, the conscious personality, at least my conscious personality, just kind of reels. The personality just kind of feels this intense vertigo. Like, I have no idea what that means. I don't know how I can possibly understand that. And yet something deeper than the level of personality in me just relaxes into it and says, like, this is true.
Mm-hmm.
This is the way of things.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's okay.
You have to kind of step outside the ego to fully experience the miracle that is that,
Yeah.
that higher self, that higher existence, God, the
So,
divine.
and that's, yeah, no, and I mean, I think that that's implicit in everything we've been saying in this conversation, but maybe just to name it, it's difficult to learn to function as a human being beyond the thinking mind. I think we're taught from such an early age to orient to our thinking mind, to think our way through things, think our way through life. That I think for my experience as a teacher in the kind of area that I teach in, everybody has a lot of access, like you said, Elle, to this space. And yet to really notice those moments where I'm functioning in these spiritual realities that are far beyond what my mind could understand or process, to learn to relax into those moments more and more and trust them and learn this new kind of language, where communication is instantaneous. It takes some getting used to. And I think one of the big challenges I meet with my students is this, like, when they come up to that precipice of this, like, awesome, luminous infinity, they just kind of brace and say, like, what happens to me, like me, the thinking mind, the personality, if I just, like, let go into that great river. So that's interesting. That's another episode.
Yeah.
Like,
There's
how
a
do you work
lot.
with that?
Like the
How do you
sound
work?
bath
How do you work with that?
experience where you just let go and you just let the river
Oh
take
my
you.
gosh. In Sedona, I had a transformational sound bath experience. I did not eat. I was not prepared.
Was it your first sound bath?
It was, and I was
Yeah.
totally prepared to be so bored and just sit there, be
Amen.
silent, right, for 50 whole minutes. No, it was transformative, but um yeah, we have obviously a lot of material we could dive into here too. I could, philosophize all day about
Not
these
me.
things.
I can only philosophize for about 30 minutes and I'm exhausted because I'm not actually a philosopher.
I want to make sure
So,
we bring it to practical application.
right,
How
I
do
was gonna say,
people get
let's bring it
started?
back down.
Bring it back
Sure.
down. How do people get
Yeah.
started? They want to become more mindful. They want to look within. They want to create more awareness. They want to ablate, with just the
They
physical
attend
experience.
one of Thomas's workshops. That's what they do.
Well, yeah, I mean, I've tried to create supports where people can, like, listen to a podcast or do an online course, or if they have if they're capable, they could come and gather with us in person. I've really tried to make this practice available, books as well, through every medium I know how. But, like, if I get back to the basics of it, let's come back to where we started, like recollection, samadhi, like this process of gathering ourselves from a scattered, fragmented state into a state of wholeness, groundedness, stillness. Any practice where we do that is a step in the right direction. I think we're learning to navigate a new medium, right? It feels like terra incognita, like this strange foreign land as we begin, and the inner world is just immense and can feel actually harrowing and unmanageable. And with a little help from our friends, community, with, I think competent teachers, we can find our legs. Like to really get some help to learn to navigate this new medium, this like inner world. And in that, as we do that, we learn to kind of disidentify from every single thought that comes up. We realize, oh, just because a thought comes up doesn't mean I need to think 50 more thoughts about that thought. I can just like let that come and go. And emotions that come up, I can learn to let those come and go. We kind of, one of the foundational skills, I think, of an awareness practice, if we call it that, is learning to kind of unstick from all the material. Like thoughts and emotions are like Velcro in our minds. Like we just think that's where the main event is, so we're paying attention to it because I don't want to miss something important. And like the more we practice like this non-sticky relationship, that Velcro starts to feel more like Teflon. So these thoughts and these emotions, they're sliding through, and I get this sense of a flow state where like, oh, actually I can already make out a more subtle reality that I'm alive to. And I couldn't put words to it, but it actually feels like very rich and very powerful and very meaningful. And it's not so uncommon in that space to like accidentally talk to your great great grandmother at winter quarters. Weird things can start happening in this kind of intermediate realm, but we'll tend to miss it if we're paying attention to every thought and feeling that comes up on our screen. We'll tend to miss like the bigger communications, I think.
Yeah.
So that's a little bit. I hope that was practical enough. Come to a retreat.
Plug in.
I often use the visualization. I mean, visualization is a really helpful tool, I think, just in
Yeah.
general, but especially kind of towards the beginning of my development, I would kind of visualize my mind as a stage. And often that stage had a bunch of different, who would watch that show?
Mhm.
That's a bunch of stuff going on at the same
Crazy.
time. All the train, all the tracks, all the conversations.
I had a
Um,
meditation teacher who called it channel me. He's like,
Oh.
quit watching channel me. There's other stuff
that's great.
going on.
Yeah,
Oh,
that's
really?
great.
Crazy.
Through the practice of that, yeah, I became aware that there's also a backstage. There's a lot going on backstage as well. But when you clear that stage, you leave the space for the really important things to come through and settle down, right? We get lost in the momentary, like shiftiness, the momentary. I kind of visualize it, I'm gonna date myself. Like the visualizers they used to have on music and when you had your own downloaded library on your computer, we didn't stream things back then. And they had like the thing that would move up and down with the beat
Oh,
of the music,
yeah.
right? All of those peaks and valleys, this is the mind that we're experiencing. It's like the temporary mind, right? It's the temporary existence. But below those things, if we can let them kind of slide away. Whereas my meditation teacher, he was this big teddy bear of a guy. His name was Dr. Honey. He represented Winnie the Pooh in every aspect of his life. Hugely Buddhist. He was my capstone professor in meditation in college. He would say, like acknowledge the thought, sit with the thought, release the thought, like let it be, let it come through you, and then let it go. And when you do that, you become aware that they are transitory. They don't have to stick. Like you said, they can become Teflon. And then below those thoughts is a subtext of everything else that really is more like your inner self. And beneath that inner self is connection.
Mm,
So I love
yeah,
that.
nice.
Yeah. Well, thank you
It's
so
a
much
great
for coming to
visual.
be with us today. I mean, this has been such an interesting conversation. I've taken notes. I've got some stuff I'm going to be chewing on and thinking about. Really, though,
Yeah, me
it's
too.
yeah, especially with the ancestors and our bodies and processing emotions and the healing on both sides, the ripple effect. There's a lot going on there for sure.
Yeah, it's a bigger
For
awareness
sure.
idea for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Well, yeah, no, I really have enjoyed the time with you too, and really appreciate your work. Thanks for having me come on.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hopefully we'll see a bit more of you at some point, and hopefully everybody else also got something out of this. Where can people find you, Thomas? Where can they reach out to you or
Yeah.
sign up for a retreat?
Yeah, website. You can
Retreat?
check out all my work. Yeah. Yeah, thank you for the plug. Lowerlightswisdom.org. So Lower Lights, that's from a Protestant hymn that I really love. Let the lower lights be burning.
I do love that
Um,
song.
lowerlightswisdom.org. And that's kind of where you can keep up with stuff going
Yeah.
on in my world.
And Elle and I are attending one of his events in August, so we will obviously come
Oh,
back with
that's,
a
I'm
follow
so
up.
happy I'll see you too in
Yeah,
Salt Lake City.
we'll
Yeah,
follow
that'll
up
be a
on the
lot of
podcast and
fun.
let people know all the things we learned.
Yeah, amazing. Yeah, yeah, it'll be great to be with you in person. I've never been with either of you oh no, yes, for sure. I
Just
remember now. I remember now.
once,
Yeah.
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 It was our initial
Okay.
meeting point. Thank you so much for your time. We hope everybody has learned something. I love the deep diving, so everybody maybe take a deep breath and take some time to process all that
Yeah,
we just talked
indeed.
about.
Yeah.
And we will see you next time. As always, you can communicate with Camille and I on our website, which
Is
is
throughtheveilepodcast.com.
right, or our email is found there. We also can be found on social media, but we'll catch up with you guys next time. Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thanks so much.